In a grand 1920s manner, a masked ball hides deadly secrets. When Ambassador Victor Morel collapses, poisoned under a moonlit rose arbor, Hercule Poirot steps into a web of jealousy, political intrigue, and espionage. A jealous wife, a rival politician, and a mysterious crimson-cloaked Gestal have motives, but only one holds the truth. With a shattered champagne glass and a cryptic letter as clues, Poirot unravels a plot to sabotage a crucial treaty, revealing a spy's chilling precision. In a dance of deception that will grip you from the first waltz to the final confession. Chapter 1. The Invitation. The autumn evening draped Ashbourne Manor in a velvet hush, its turrets piercing the twilight sky like sentinels of a forgotten age. The estate, nestled in the rolling hills of Sussex, glowed with the warmth of 1,000 candles, their light spilling through tall mullioned windows onto the manicured lawns below. Within, preparations for the masked ball were in full swing, a spectacle to mark the delicate negotiations of a diplomatic summit. The air buzzed with anticipation, yet beneath the surface, Hercule Poirot sensed a tremor of discord. Subtle as a misstep in a waltz, Poirot stood in the grand foyer, his small, fastidious frame immaculate in a tailored black suit, his silver mask a masterpiece of filigree, swirls resting lightly in his gloved hand. The invitation, embossed with gold leaf and sealed with the Ashbourne crest, lay folded in his pocket. It had arrived at his London flat a fortnight ago, accompanied by a personal note from Lord Reginald Ashbourne himself, requesting Poirot's presence as a guest of honor. "Your reputation for discernment precedes you," the note had read, a compliment that piqued Poirot's curiosity. Why, he wondered, would a diplomatic gathering require the scrutiny of Hercule Poirot? He adjusted his bow tie, his movements precise, and surveyed the scene. Footmen in livery glided past, bearing trays of crystal flutes that sparkled with champagne. The chandeliers above cast prismatic light across the marble floor, where guests in masks of peacock feathers, velvet, and gilded leather mingled with practiced ease. The summit, Poirot had learned, involved delicate negotiations between France and Britain, with Ambassador Victor Morel at its heart. Yet the opulence of the evening suggested more than diplomacy a stage for secrets, perhaps, or for rivalries to simmer unseen. Poirot's eyes, sharp behind his mask, caught a figure descending the grand staircase. Lord Ashbourne, robust and silver-haired, wore a mask of emerald silk that did little to conceal his hearty demeanor. "Monsieur Poirot," he boomed, clasping Poirot's hand. "A pleasure to have you among us. This summit, you know, is a delicate affair. Your presence lends a certain reassurance." His smile was warm, but his glance darted toward the ballroom, where a woman in a sapphire gown stood, her posture tense. Lady Eleanor Ashbourne, Poirot presumed, noting the faint lines of strain beneath her diamond-encrusted mask. "Monseigneur Poirot," replied, his voice smooth as polished oak, "I am honored. But tell me, this summit carries a weight, Nan." Ashbourne's smile faltered for a fraction of a second. "All politics, you know, always a tangle, but tonight, we celebrate." He gestured toward the ballroom, where the orchestra struck up a lilting melody. Poirot nodded, his little gray cells already stirring. A host so eager to dismiss the summit's gravity was a host with something to conceal. As they entered the ballroom, Poirot's gaze swept the crowd. Ambassador Morel, unmistakable in his crimson sash and golden mask, held court near a marble pillar, his laughter rich but calculated. Beside him stood Madame Clara Duval, his wife, her auburn hair coiled beneath a mask of ivory lace. Her hand rested possessively on Morel's arm, yet her eyes darted with a flicker of unease. Across the room, Sir Geoffrey Vance, a British politician, with a reputation for bluntness, stood rigid, his hawk-like mask mirroring his stern expression. And then, weaving through the throng, Poirot glimpsed a figure cloaked in crimson, their black velvet mask adorned with gold filigree. They moved with a panther's grace, their identity obscured, yet their presence magnetic. Poirot paused, his mustache twitching faintly. "Who is that, I wonder?" he murmured to himself. The crimson figure turned, as if sensing his scrutiny, and for a moment their eyes met, dark, guarded, and impenetrably alert. Poirot's fingers tightened on his cane. In the ordered symmetry of his mind, a single discordant note had sounded. This masked ball, he sensed, was no mere celebration. It was a chessboard, and the pieces were already in motion. "Captain Hastings will arrive soon," Poirot mused, glancing at his pocket watch. His old friend had promised to join him, delayed by some trifling matter in London. Poirot smiled faintly. Hastings, with his earnest heart and unerring loyalty, would no doubt find the evening's glamour intoxicating. But for Poirot, the true allure lay not in the music or the masks, but in the secrets they concealed. He slipped his mask into place, its cool metal a fitting shield, and stepped into the dance of intrigue. Chapter 2. The crimson waltz. The ballroom of Ashbourne Manor was a vision of grandeur. Its vaulted ceiling painted with cherubs and gilded clouds that seemed to float above the swirling dancers. Crystal chandeliers cast a soft, prismatic glow, their light fracturing into 1,000 tiny rainbows that danced across silken gowns and velvet cloaks. The orchestra, tucked into an alcove framed by crimson drapes, played a Viennese waltz, its notes lilting and precise, urging the guests into a rhythm as elegant as it was hypnotic. Hercule Poirot stood at the edge of the polished parquet floor, his silver mask glinting faintly, his keen eyes absorbing every detail of the scene before him. The air was heavy with the scent of tuberose and amber. But beneath the opulence, Poirot detected a subtler perfume, one of ambition, rivalry, and secrets tightly held. He adjusted his cuffs, the movement meticulous, and allowed his gaze to roam. The masked ball, with its anonymity and allure, was a perfect stage for deception. Guests glided past in a kaleidoscope of colors: emerald plumes, sapphire veils, and masks encrusted with pearls or jet. Yet it was the human currents beneath the pageantry that intrigued Poirot most. The summit, ostensibly a diplomatic affair, had drawn an eclectic assembly: aristocrats, diplomats, and those whose presence hinted at motives less transparent. Poirot's little gray cells hummed with curiosity, attuned to the unspoken tensions that rippled through the room like a breeze through a still forest. Near the center of the ballroom, Ambassador Victor Morel held court, his crimson sash a bold contrast to his tailored black suit. His mask, a golden affair with intricate filigree, did little to conceal his charisma. Morel's laughter rang out, warm and practiced, as he leaned toward a young woman in a gown of pale lavender, her mask adorned with ostrich feathers. Poirot noted the tilt of Morel's head, the way his hand lingered a fraction too long on the woman's arm, a flirtation perhaps, but one calculated to be seen. Beside Morel stood his wife, Madame Clara Duval, her auburn hair swept into an elegant chignon beneath a mask of ivory lace. Her posture was rigid, her lips pressed into a thin line, and her eyes, visible through the slits of her mask, burned with a quiet intensity. Poirot made a mental note. Jealousy, that most volatile of emotions, was already at play. Across the room, near a table laden with crystal flutes and silver trays of canapes, stood Sir Geoffrey Vance, the British politician whose hawk-like mask mirrored his sharp, unyielding demeanor. His dark suit was severe, almost militaristic, and he stood apart from the dancers, his arms crossed as he surveyed the crowd. Poirot observed the faint scowl beneath Vance's mask, the way his gaze lingered on Morel with undisguised disdain. A political rival, Poirot recalled, one who had publicly opposed Morel's proposed treaty, a document rumored to shift the balance of European alliances. Vance's presence was no mere courtesy. It was a statement, and Poirot intended to uncover its meaning. His attention shifted to a figure moving through the crowd with the grace of a shadow. The crimson-cloaked guest, their black velvet mask edged with gold, wove between dancers with a purpose that belied their casual air. They paused near a marble pillar, their head turning slightly as if scanning the room. Poirot's eyes narrowed. The crimson cloak was distinctive, its rich hue catching the light like spilt wine, and the mask obscured all but the sharp line of a jaw and the glint of dark eyes. This Monsieur Leclerc, as they had been introduced, was an enigma. Guest whose name appeared on no official list, yet whose presence Lord Ashburn had acknowledged with a nervous nod. Poirot's fingers tightened on his cane. Anonymity was a powerful tool, and this figure wielded it with unsettling skill. The waltz reached a crescendo, and the dancers spun faster, their masks creating a dizzying mosaic of color and mystery. Poirot stepped forward, his small frame slipping easily through the throng. He positioned himself near a gilded mirror, its surface reflecting the ballroom's splendor and offering a discreet vantage point. From here, he could observe without being observed, a habit honed over years of unraveling human puzzles. His gaze returned to Madame Duval, who had moved away from her husband and now stood near a velvet-curtained window, her hands clasped tightly before her. A footman offered her a glass of champagne, which she declined with a sharp shake of her head. Poirot noted the gesture, nervous, perhaps, or indicative of a mind preoccupied. Lord Ashburn, ever the genial host, circulated among his guests, his emerald mask a beacon of warmth. Yet Poirot detected a strain in his smile, a flicker of unease, as he glanced toward his wife, Lady Eleanor, who stood near the orchestra, engaged in animated conversation with a group of diplomats. Her sapphire gown shimmered, and her diamond-encrusted mask caught the light. But her laughter seemed forced, her gestures too quick. Poirot recalled the brief exchange in the foyer, Ashburn's fleeting hesitation when asked about the summit. Was it the weight of hosting such an event, or something more personal? Lady Eleanor's eyes darted toward Morel, and for a moment her expression softened, then hardened again. Poirot's mustache twitched. A triangle, perhaps, of affection and resentment. The music shifted to a slower, more intimate melody, and the dancers adjusted their steps, their masks lending an air of intrigue to every glance and touch. Poirot's thoughts were interrupted by the arrival of Captain Arthur Hastings. His face flushed from his delayed journey from London. Hastings, ever the picture of English sincerity, wore a simple black mask that did little to disguise his boyish enthusiasm. "Poirot, old chap," he exclaimed, clapping his friend on the shoulder. "What a spectacle! I say, this place is like something out of a novel. All these masks makes one feel like a spy." Poirot smiled indulgently. "Mon ami, you are late, as always. But you are correct, the masks, they conceal much, and tonight, I suspect, they hide more than mere faces." He gestured subtly toward the crimson-cloaked figure, who had now paused near the champagne table, their gloved hand hovering over a tray of glasses. Hastings followed his gaze, his brow furrowing. "Who's that? Bit mysterious, don't you think?" "Precisement," Poirot murmured. "They call themselves Monsieur Leclerc, but I wonder, what is their true purpose here?" He watched as the crimson figure selected a glass, their movements deliberate, almost theatrical. They turned, offering the glass to a passing guest, a young diplomat, who accepted it with a nod. Poirot's eyes sharpened. The gesture seemed innocuous, yet something in the crimson figure's posture suggested intent. Was it a test, a distraction, or something more sinister? Hastings, oblivious to the undercurrent, sipped his own champagne and surveyed the room. "Look at Morel, holding court like a king. Fellow's got charm, I'll give him that. But I heard Vance isn't too fond of him. Some sort of political row, isn't it?" Poirot nodded, his mind cataloguing Hastings' words. "A row, yes. But perhaps more than politics. The treaty Morel champions it is a delicate matter. And delicacy, mon ami, often breeds desperation." The waltz ended, and a murmur of applause rippled through the crowd. Poirot seized the moment to approach Lord Ashburn, who was adjusting his mask near a floral arrangement of roses and lilies. "Monseigneur," Poirot said, his voice soft but commanding, "this ball is magnific, but I sense a certain tension. The summit, it weighs heavily, Nan." Ashburn's eyes flickered, but he recovered quickly, his laugh hearty. "Oh, Poirot, you see shadows where there are none. It's merely the strain of diplomacy. Morel's treaty is ambitious, but we'll sort it out. Tonight we dance." He clapped Poirot's arm and moved off, but not before Poirot noted the slight tremor in his hand. Poirot returned to his vantage point, his mind a whirl of observations. Madame Duval had rejoined her husband, her smile brittle as she linked arms with him. Sir Geoffrey Vance had moved closer to the center of the room, his conversation with a group of diplomats clipped and intense, and the crimson figure Monsieur Leclerc had vanished into the crowd, their cloak a fleeting glimpse of red among the sea of colors. Poirot's thoughts were interrupted by a sudden hush, a collective intake of breath as the orchestra paused. A clock somewhere in the manor chimed midnight, its tolling deep and resonant. In that moment, a woman's scream shattered the silence, sharp and piercing, rising from the direction of the garden beyond the ballroom's French doors. The guests froze, their masks turning toward the sound like moths to a flame. Poirot's heart quickened, not with fear but with the certainty that the evening's true drama had begun. He set down his untouched champagne and moved swiftly toward the doors, Hastings at his heels. "Good Lord, Poirot, what's happened?" Hastings asked, his voice tight. "We shall see, mon ami," Poirot replied, his tone calm but his eyes alight with purpose. The crowd parted, and he stepped onto the terrace, the cool night air a sharp contrast to the ballroom's warmth. Below, in the moonlit garden, a figure lay sprawled beneath a rose arbor, motionless. The guests surged forward, their masks grotesque in the silver light, but Poirot held up a hand, commanding silence. "Do not approach," he said firmly. "The truth, it must not be disturbed." He descended the steps, his patent leather shoes clicking softly on the stone, and knelt beside the body. It was Ambassador Morel, his golden mask askew, his face contorted in a rictus of pain. A faint froth clung to his lips, and the air carried a bitter, almond-like scent. Poirot's mind raced cyanide, swift and merciless. Nearby, a shattered champagne glass glinted in the grass, its contents pooling darkly. He glanced back at the ballroom, where the crimson figures stood at the edge of the crowd, their mask an impenetrable void. "Mon Dieu," Poirot whispered, his voice barely audible. "The crimson waltz has ended, and the dance of death has begun." He rose, his small frame radiating authority, and turned to Hastings. "We have work to do, mon ami. The masquerade, it hides a murderer." Chapter 3. The Garden's Secret. The garden of Ashburn Manor lay bathed in moonlight, its roses and ivy casting spectral shadows across the gravel paths. The air was crisp, scented with damp earth and the faint sweetness of late-blooming flowers. But an undercurrent of dread now tainted its tranquility. The scream that had shattered the ballroom's revelry still echoed in the minds of the guests, who clustered at the terrace's edge, their masks lending an eerie anonymity to their shocked expressions. Hercule Poirot knelt beside the body of Ambassador Victor Morel, his gloved hands hovering over the scene, careful not to disturb its silent testimony. The diplomat's face, frozen in a grimace of agony, bore the unmistakable signs of poison of froth at the lips. Eyes wide with the terror of his final moments, Poirot's keen gaze settled on a shattered champagne glass, its fragments glinting like broken stars in the grass. A faint, bitter scent, reminiscent of almonds, confirmed his suspicion. Cyanide, delivered with lethal precision. Captain Arthur Hastings stood at Poirot's side, his face pale beneath his simple black mask. "Good heavens, Poirot," he whispered, his voice trembling with a mix of horror and disbelief. Poison, isn't it? Who could have done such a thing in the middle of a ball? Poirot did not answer immediately, his eyes scanning the body, the glass, and the surrounding ground. The rose arbor above them formed a natural canopy, its thorns catching the moonlight like tiny daggers. Mon ami, he said at last, his voice low and measured, the question is not only who, but how and why. The method, it is clear. The motive, it remains hidden. Poirot rose, dusting his knees with a fastidious flick of his hand, and turned to the gathered crowd. Their murmurs hushed under his commanding presence, despite his diminutive stature. Mesdames et messieurs, he said, his accent crisp, I must ask that you return to the ballroom. This is now a matter for investigation. Do not leave the manor. His tone brooked no argument, and the guests, after a moment's hesitation, began to file back through the French doors, their masks now seeming less festive, more like veils of suspicion. Lord Ashburn pushed through the crowd, his emerald mask askew, his face flushed with distress. Poirot, this is ghastly. Morel dead. It's unthinkable. He ran a hand through his silver hair, his eyes darting to the body. What can be done? Poirot regarded him closely, noting the genuine shock but also a flicker of something else, fear, perhaps, or guilt. Monseigneur, Poirot replied, what can be done is to uncover the truth. I shall require your assistance, and that of your staff. No one must leave until I have spoken with them. Lady Eleanor appeared at her husband's side, her sapphire gown shimmering in the moonlight. Her diamond-encrusted mask could not hide the pallor of her cheeks or the tremor in her voice. Monsieur Poirot, she said, her words faltering, this is a tragedy. Victor was a dear friend. Her eyes flicked to the body, then away, as if unable to bear the sight. Poirot noted the hesitation, the choice of words. A dear friend, she had said, but the strain in her voice suggested more or less. He inclined his head. Madame, your grief is understood, but I must ask you to join the others inside. As the Ashburns retreated, Poirot turned his attention to the scene. The champagne glass, its stem snapped clean, lay in pieces near Morel's outstretched hand. A small pool of liquid had seeped into the earth, its surface catching the moonlight. Poirot crouched again, his nose wrinkling at the faint chemical temps. Cyanide, without doubt, he murmured to Hastings. Administered, I suspect, through the champagne. The glassite is the key. He examined the fragments, noting a faint powdery residue on the rim of one shard. A poison so swift requires precision. The murderer, they were bold to strike. In such a public setting, Hastings shivered, glancing at the shadowy garden. Bold or mad, Poirot. To poison a man in a crowd like that's diabolical. Poirot's mustache twitched, a sign of his mind at work. Not mad, mon ami, calculated. The ball, with its masks and chaos, provided the perfect cloak. But the murderer, they have left a trace. They always do. Poirot beckoned to a footman hovering nervously at the terrace steps. The young man, barely 20, approached with wide eyes, his livery slightly askew. You, Monsieur Poirot, said, his tone gentle but firm. You served the champagne tonight, oui? The footman nodded, swallowing hard. Yes, sir. I carried a tray through the ballroom. Ambassador Morel took a glass maybe half an hour ago. Poirot's eyes sharpened. And who was near the tray before he took it? Think carefully. The footman frowned, his brow creasing under his simple cloth mask. It was crowded, sir. People were all around, dancing, talking, but I remember someone in a red cloak, with a black and gold mask. They brushed past me, near the champagne table. I thought they were just reaching for a glass, but they didn't. Take one. Poirot's gaze intensified. This figure in red, did they touch the tray? The footman hesitated. I'm not sure, sir. It was so quick. But they were close, very close. Poirot dismissed the footman with a nod, his mind cataloguing the information. The crimson-cloaked guest Monsieur Leclerc, or so they claimed, had been near the champagne. A coincidence, perhaps, but Poirot did not believe in coincidences. He turned to Hastings. "We must find this Leclerc, mon ami. Their presence at the tray is suggestive." Hastings nodded, though his expression betrayed his unease. "You think they're the killer, Poirot? That red cloak does stand out." "Perhaps," Poirot said, his voice soft. "But the cloak, it is a distraction as much as a clue. We must look beyond the surface." He glanced at the body once more, noting Morel's position sprawled as if he had staggered a few steps before collapsing. The garden path led to a secluded corner, shielded by tall hedges and a stone fountain. "He came here, away from the crowd," Poirot mused. "Why? To meet someone, or to escape?" Before Hastings could respond, a rustle in the nearby shrubbery caught Poirot's attention. He moved swiftly, his cane tapping the ground, and parted the foliage to reveal a small monogrammed handkerchief, its corner embroidered with the letter C. He held it up to the moonlight, his eyes narrowing. "Interesting," he said, slipping it into his pocket. "A careless act, or a deliberate one? We shall see." The local constable, summoned by a frantic servant, arrived at last, his heavy boots crunching on the gravel. He was a stout man named Inspector Japp, familiar to Poirot from past cases, though his presence in Sussex was a surprise. Well, Poirot," Japp said, tipping his hat. "Fancy meeting you at a murder scene. What's the story here?" Poirot briefed him succinctly, outlining the poison, the glass, and the mysterious crimson figure. Japp scratched his chin. "Sounds like a proper mess. I'll have my men secure the area. You sticking around to poke your nose in, I suppose?" Poirot smiled faintly. "Inspector, it is not my nose, but my little grey cells that shall assist you. This crime, it is not random. It is a puzzle, and I, Hercule Poirot, shall solve it." Japp grunted, half amused, half resigned. "Right then. Let's get this body to the coroner and start questioning the guests. That lot in there won't like it, mind you." As Japp organized his men, Poirot returned to the terrace, where a few guests lingered, their whispers sharp with speculation. Madame Clara Duval stood apart, her ivory mask clutched in her hand, her face a mask of grief, or was it fear? Sir Geoffrey Vance leaned against a pillar, his hawk-like mask still in place, his eyes cold and calculating. And there, at the far end of the terrace, Poirot glimpsed the crimson cloak, its wearer slipping back into the ballroom's shadows. "Mon ami," Poirot said to Hastings, his voice low, "we must move quickly. The murderer is among us, and they are watching." He straightened his tie, his resolve as unyielding as the moonlight. The garden held its secrets, but Poirot was determined to unearth them, one delicate thread at a time. Chapter 4. The suspects emerged. The library of Ashbourne Manor was a haven of quietude, its oak-paneled walls lined with leather-bound volumes that gleamed softly in the glow of brass lamps. The air carried the scent of aged paper and polished wood, a stark contrast to the garden's chilling tableau of death. Hercule Poirot stood at the center of the room, his small frame commanding despite the grandeur around him. His silver mask rested on a side table, revealing the sharp lines of his face and the meticulous curve of his mustache. Before him, seated in habacked chairs, were the key figures of the evening's tragedy: Lord and Lady Ashbourne, Madame Clara Duval, Sir Geoffrey Vance, and the enigmatic Monsieur Leclerc. The weight of Ambassador Morel's murder hung over them like a storm cloud, and Poirot's piercing gaze missed nothing: the nervous twitch of a hand, the averted glance, the too stiff posture of guilt or fear. Inspector Japp, his notebook open and pencil poised, stood near the fireplace, his broad face creased with the effort of maintaining order among such illustrious company. Captain Hastings hovered by the door, his earnest expression betraying his discomfort at the tension in the room. Madame et messieurs, Poirot began, his voice clear and deliberate. A crime has been committed, a most audacious crime. Ambassador Morel was poisoned, and the murderer is among us. I, Hercule Poirot, will uncover the truth, but I require your candor. Let us begin. He turned first to Lady Eleanor Ashburn, whose sapphire gown seemed to wilt under the library's somber light. Her diamond-encrusted mask lay in her lap, her fingers twisting its ribbons. Madame Poirot said, his tone gentle but probing, you called the ambassador a dear friend. Yet I observed a certain strain in your manner tonight. Perhaps you can enlighten us. Lady Eleanor's eyes widened, then darted to her husband, who sat rigid beside her. Victor, Ambassador Morel was charming, a valued guest, she said, her voice faltering. But we argued earlier. He made advances, and I rebuffed him. It was nothing more. Poirot's eyebrows rose slightly. Nothing more, madame. Yet your distress suggests otherwise. Where were you when the scream was heard? Lady Eleanor flushed, her hands clenching. I was in the ballroom, near the orchestra. I'd stepped away to speak with some guests. When I heard the scream, I ran to the terrace like everyone else. Poirot nodded, his expression unreadable. And this argument, when did it occur? She hesitated. Just before the waltz, in the conservatory. But I swear, I did not harm him. Her voice broke, and Lord Ashburn placed a protective hand on her arm. His own face taut with unease. Poirot's gaze shifted to Sir Geoffrey Vance, whose hawk-like mask rested on the table before him, revealing a face carved with stern lines. Monsieur Vance, Poirot said, you opposed Ambassador Morel's treaty, did you not? A treaty that could alter the balance of power. Perhaps his death was convenient. Vance's eyes narrowed, his jaw tightening. I won't deny I disliked the man's politics, he said, his voice clipped. His treaty was a fool's errand, weakening Britain's position for the sake of French ambition. But poison, that's a coward's weapon, and I am no coward. He leaned forward, his gaze defiant. I was in the card-room when he died, playing whist with Lord Dunley and 2 others. Ask them. Poirot made a mental note to verify the alibi, his eyes lingering on Vance's clenched fists. A political rival has much to gain from such a death, monsieur. But we shall see. He turned to Madame Clara Duval, who sat pale and still, her ivory lace mask clutched like a talisman. Madame Duval, your husband's charm was well known, yet it caused you pain, Nan. I observed your unease tonight. Did you suspect him of infidelity? Clara's lips trembled, and she drew a sharp breath. Victor was reckless, she admitted, her voice barely above a whisper. I saw him with Lady Eleanor in the conservatory, laughing, touching her arm. I was angry, yes. But I loved him. I could never. She trailed off, tears brimming in her eyes. Poirot's tone softened, but his questions were relentless. And where were you, madame, at the moment of the scream? Clara hesitated, her fingers twisting the mask. I'd stepped away from the ballroom to the powder room to compose myself. I was alone, her voice wavered, and Poirot noted the weakness of her alibi. Alone, madame. A dangerous position in such a moment, he said, his eyes searching hers. She looked away, her grief or guilt palpable. Finally, Poirot turned to the crimson-cloaked figure. Monsieur Leclerc, who sat apart, their black velvet mask still in place, gold filigree catching the lamplight. Monsieur, Poirot said, his voice taking on a steely edge. You are a stranger here, yet you move with the confidence of one who knows their purpose. Who are you, and why were you near the champagne tray before Ambassador Morel's death? The room stilled, all eyes on the enigmatic guest. Leclerc's posture remained relaxed, but their eyes, visible through the mask's slits, were sharp and unyielding. I am a guest of Lord Ashburn, they said, their voice low, with a faint accent that Poirot could not yet place. I was invited to enjoy the ball, nothing more. As for the champagne, I merely passed by the table. I took no glass. Poirot's mustache twitched. Yet the footman recalls you lingering, monsieur. A curious coincidence. Nan Leclerc's lips curved slightly, a smile that revealed nothing. Coincidences are the stuff of life, monsieur. I have no quarrel with the ambassador. Poirot leaned forward, his gaze piercing. Perhaps not, but your presence intrigues me. You will remain, like the others, until the truth is known. Leclerc inclined their head, a gesture of acquiescence that felt more like a challenge. Inspector Japp, who had been scribbling notes, cleared his throat. Right, Poirot, that's a start. I'll have my men question the staff and check alibis. But this lot, he gestured to the suspects, they're a tricky bunch. Any thoughts? Poirot smiled faintly. Thoughts, Inspector? I have many, but they must be ordered, like the pieces of a mosaic. The poison, the glass, the motives, they form a picture, but it is not yet complete. He turned to Hastings, who looked eager to contribute. Mon ami, you will assist me in observing these guests. Their words are but a mask. Their actions will betray them. Lord Ashburn rose, his face drawn. Monsieur Poirot, this is a nightmare. My home, my guest, tainted by murder. What can I do? Poirot's expression softened, but his eyes remained sharp. You can ensure that no one leaves, Monseigneur, and you can trust Hercule Poirot to bring clarity to this darkness. Ashburn nodded, though his unease was evident as he led his wife from the room. Followed by Vance and Madame Duval, Leclerc lingered a moment, their crimson cloak sweeping the floor as they stood. You are a formidable man, Monsieur Poirot, they said softly, their accent now hinting at something Eastern, perhaps Slavic, but some truths are better left buried. Before Poirot could respond, they glided out, leaving a faint scent of sandalwood in their wake. Poirot turned to Japp and Hastings, his mind racing. The handkerchief with the C, he said, producing it from his pocket. It may belong to Madame Duval, but it may also be a plant, a distraction. And Leclerc, their secrecy is a puzzle in itself. Japp grunted. Sounds like you've got your work cut out, Poirot. I'll start with the servants. Someone must have seen something. Hastings nodded, his enthusiasm returning. What's next, Poirot? We can't let that red-cloaked fellow slip away. Next, mon ami, Poirot said, his voice resolute, we examine the scene once more. The garden, the glass, the path, they hold secrets yet to be revealed, and I, Hercule Poirot, will uncover them all. He adjusted his tie, his little grey cells, alight with the challenge of the chase, as the library's shadows seemed to whisper of the intrigue yet to unfold. Chapter 5. The champagne clue. The library's heavy silence lingered as the suspects dispersed, their footsteps echoing down the polished corridors of Ashburn Manor. Hercule Poirot stood motionless for a moment, his sharp eyes fixed on the door, through which the crimson-cloaked Monsieur Leclerc had vanished. The faint scent of sandalwood still hung in the air, a tantalizing trace of the enigma that intrigued him most. Beside him, Captain Arthur Hastings shifted restlessly, his simple black mask now tucked into his pocket, his face a mixture of eagerness and unease. Poirot, he said, his voice low, that Leclerc fellow gives me the creeps. Did you see how they dodged your questions? And that footman's story about the champagne, try it's got to mean something. Poirot's mustache twitched, a subtle sign of his mind at work. Precisement, mon ami, he replied, his tone measured. The champagne, it is the heart of this mystery. A poison so swift as cyanide requires opportunity, and the try it was the perfect vehicle. Come, we return to the garden. The scene of the crime, it speaks when one listens with care. They stepped out onto the terrace, where Inspector Japp's men were cordoning off the garden path, their lanterns casting flickering shadows across the rose arbor. The night air was cool, carrying the faint rustle of leaves and the distant murmur of the ballroom, where the orchestra had resumed playing. To calm the rattled guests, Poirot descended the stone steps, his patent leather shoes clicking softly, and approached the spot where Ambassador Morel's body had lain. The corpse had been removed to the coroner's care, but the shattered champagne glass remained, its fragments carefully marked by Japp's constables. Poirot knelt, his gloved fingers hovering over the largest shard, which bore a faint powdery residue along its rim. "Observe, Hastings," he said, pointing to the residue. "This powder, it is no accident. The cyanide, it was applied to the glass likely just before Morel took it. The murderer, they were precise, audacious." He lifted the shard with a handkerchief, holding it to the light of a nearby lantern. The residue glimmered faintly, a silent witness to the crime. The glass was whole when Morel drank, yet it shattered when he fell. This suggests he staggered, perhaps in his final moments, before collapsing under the arbor. Hastings frowned, his brow creasing. But Poirot, how could someone tamper with the glass in a crowded ballroom? It's madness, everyone was watching. Poirot's eyes gleamed. Not madness, mon ami, but cunning. The masks, the movement, the music, they created a chaos in which a subtle act could go unnoticed. The footman spoke of the crimson figure near the tray. We must learn more of this moment. Poirot summoned the footman, a nervous young man named Thomas, who approached with a lantern clutched tightly in his hands. His livery was slightly rumpled, and his eyes darted toward the gardens. "Shadows. Monsieur Thomas," Poirot said, his voice calm but authoritative. "You told us of the figure in the crimson cloak. Describe the moment precisely. What did you see? What did you feel?" Thomas swallowed, his Adam's apple bobbing. "It was during the waltz, sir, just before midnight. I was carrying the tray silver, with a dozen glasses. The ballroom was packed, people brushing past. That person in the red cloak, they came close, real close. Their glove touched the tray, I think, but it was so quick I couldn't swear to it. They didn't take a glass, just moved on." Poirot's gaze sharpened. "Touched the tray, you say? Did you see their hand, their glove? Any detail, however?" "Small." Thomas hesitated, then nodded. "It was a black glove, sir, with a bit of gold stitching on the cuff. I noticed it because it caught the light. But they were gone before I could think much of it. Then the ambassador took a glass maybe a minute later. He was laughing, talking to some lady in a green dress." Poirot filed away the detail of the gold-stitched glove, his mind cross-referencing it with his observations of Monsieur Le... "And the tray," he continued, "it was never out of your sight?" Thomas shook his head vigorously. "No, sir. I held it the whole time, except when I set it down for a moment on the table to adjust my grip. But that was only a second. And I was right there." Poirot's eyebrows rose slightly. "A second is enough, monsieur, for one with intent. You have been most helpful." As Thomas retreated, Poirot turned to Hastings. The tray was set down, however briefly. "That was the moment, I believe, when the poison was applied." A sleight of hand, concealed by the crowd. Hastings looked skeptical. "But Poirot, cyanide, it's not something you carry in your pocket, is it? Wouldn't it take planning?" Poirot nodded. "Exactement. This was no impulse. The murderer knew Morel would take a glass, and they prepared their weapon in advance. We must discover how the poison reached the glass hand who had the opportunity." Poirot moved to the champagne table, now cleared of its contents by Japp's men, who had preserved the remaining glasses for analysis. He examined the tables. Surface, a polished mahogany affair, draped with a white cloth. A faint stain, barely visible, caught his aja smudge of powder near the edge, similar to the residue on the glass. "Regardus, Hastings," he said, pointing another trace. "The poison was here, on the table, perhaps spilled in haste. He scanned the surrounding floor, noting a scuff mark in the dust, a heel, perhaps, or the brush of a cloak. Someone stood here, tampering with the glass, and they were not entirely careful. Inspector Japp approached, his notebook tucked under his arm. Poirot, my lads have questioned the staff. No one saw anything odd, except that footman's story about the red cloak. We're testing the glasses for poison, but it'll take time. Any theories? Poirot's eyes twinkled. Theories, Inspector. I have only facts, and they begin to form a pattern. The cyanide was applied to one glass, not the tray, for only Morel was struck. The murderer knew their target. We must now ask, who wished Morel dead, and why? Japp grunted. That lot in the library, Lady Eleanor, Vance, Madame Duval, and that Leclerc character, they've all got reasons, haven't they? Jealousy, politics, who knows what else? Poirot inclined his head. But reasons are not proof. We must look to the details, the glove, the powder, the moment of opportunity, and we must find Monsieur Leclerc. Their proximity to the tray is no accident. Hastings, eager to contribute, gestured toward the ballroom. Shall we track down Leclerc now, Poirot? They can't have gone far. Poirot shook his head. Patience, mon ami. To confront them now would reveal our hand. Let them believe they are unobserved. Instead, we shall speak to the butler. He oversees the service, and he may have seen what young Thomas did not. They found the butler, Mr. Grayson, in the servants' hall, a wiry man with a lined face and a demeanor of quiet competence. His hands trembled slightly as he polished a silver tray, a nervous habit under Poirot's scrutiny. Monsieur Grayson, Poirot said, his voice soothing. The champagne tonight was served from a single tray. Grayson nodded. Yes, sir. We filled the glasses in the pantry, and Thomas carried them out. I oversaw the preparation myself. Finest vintage. No tampering possible before it reached the ballroom. Poirot's eyes narrowed. And after the tray was set down, Thomas tells me, who was near it then? Grayson frowned, his brow furrowing. It was a busy night, sir. Guests everywhere, masks making it hard to tell one from another. But I did see that person in the red cloak, the one Thomas mentioned. They stood by the table for a moment, just as he set the tray down. I thought they were admiring the display. Poirot leaned forward. Admiring or acting? Did you see their hands, their movements? Grayson shook his head. No, sir, it was too quick. But they were deliberate, if you take my meaning. Not like the other guests, who were all a bit tipsy. Poirot thanked the butler and stepped back into the corridor, his mind racing. The crimson figure's presence at the tray was now confirmed by 2 witnesses. Yet their actions remained elusive. Hastings, he said, we have a picture forming, but it lacks clarity. The poison was placed on the glass was taken by Morel, and the crimson figure was there. But why Morel? And how did they ensure he took the fatal glass? As they returned to the terrace, Poirot paused, his gaze falling on the handkerchief, with the embroidered C still tucked in his pocket. This handkerchief, he murmured. It may point to Madame Duval, but it is too convenient, Nan. A murderer so careful with poison would not leave such a clue unless it was meant to mislead. Hastings nodded, his enthusiasm growing. A red herring, a Poirot. So where do we go from here? Poirot's eyes gleamed in the lantern light. We go to the heart of the matter, mon ami. We question the motives, jealousy, politics, or something deeper. And we watch Monsieur Leclerc. Their mask hides more than a face, I think. He adjusted his cuffs, his resolve unshaken. The champagne clue had sharpened the puzzle's edges, and Poirot was determined to fit the pieces together, no matter how cleverly the murderer had hidden them. Chapter 6. The Jealous Spouse. The drawing room of Ashbourne Manor was a study in understated elegance. its walls adorned with delicate watercolor landscapes and its furniture upholstered in soft damask. A fire crackled in the grate, casting a warm glow that did little to dispel the chill of suspicion lingering from the night's grim events. Hercule Poirot sat in a high-backed chair, his posture impeccable, his sharp eyes fixed on Madame Clara Duval, who stood by a window overlooking the darkened gardens. Her auburn hair, freed from its earlier chignon, framed her pale face in soft waves, and her ivory lace mask lay discarded on a side table, revealing eyes red with unshed tears. The embroidered handkerchief with the initial C, now tucked safely in Poirot's pocket, seemed to pulse with significance as he prepared to probe the heart of her grief. Captain Arthur Hastings stood near the door, his hands clasped behind his back, his expression a blend of sympathy and curiosity. Inspector Japp had retreated to coordinate with his constables, leaving Poirot to conduct this delicate interview. The ballroom's music had faded to a distant murmur, the revelry subdued by the shadow of murder. Poirot leaned forward slightly, his voice gentle but precise, like a surgeon's scalpel. "Madame Duval," he began, "you have suffered a great loss tonight. Ambassador Morel was a man of charm, but charm, it can wound as much as it captivates. Tell me, what passed between you and your husband before his death?" Clara's fingers tightened on the lace handkerchief she held, its edges fraying under her nervous grip. "Victor was difficult," she said, her voice low and halting. "He was brilliant, ambitious, but he craved attention. I saw him tonight, with Lady Eleanor in the conservatory, laughing, his hand on her arm. It wasn't the first time." Her lips trembled, and she turned to face Poirot, her eyes blazing with a mix of pain and defiance. "I was humiliated, Monsieur Poirot, but I did not kill him. I loved him, despite his flaws." Poirot's gaze softened, but his questions remained relentless. "This humiliation, madame, it must have stirred great anger. You were absent from the ballroom when the scream was heard. Where were you?" Clara's breath caught, and she looked away, her fingers twisting the handkerchief into knots. "I told you, I was in the powder room. I needed a moment to collect myself. I was alone." Her voice wavered, and Poirot noted the slight tremor in her hands, the way her eyes avoided his. "Alone, madame," he pressed, his tone deceptively mild. A dangerous claim in such a moment. "And this handkerchief," he produced the embroidered C from his pocket, holding it up so the firelight caught its delicate stitching, "was found near the body. It is yours, Nan." Clara's eyes widened, and she took a step back, her hand flying to her throat. I don't know," she stammered. "I have many handkerchiefs, but I didn't drop one in the garden. I swear it." Poirot studied her, his little gray cells sifting through her words, her gestures, her fear. The handkerchief was a damning clue, yet its placement felt too convenient, as if designed to point suspicion at her. "Madame," he said, "love and jealousy, they are close companions. Did you see anyone near the champagne tray? Perhaps someone in a crimson cloak?" Clara's brow furrowed, and she shook her head. "No, I was too caught up in my own thoughts. I didn't notice the tray, or anyone near it. I only saw Victor take a glass, and then—" Her voice broke, and she buried her face in her hands. Hastings shifted uncomfortably, his instinct to comfort warring with his role as observer. "Poor woman," he murmured to Poirot. "She's heartbroken, isn't she?" Poirot's eyes remained fixed on Clara. "Heartbroken, oui, but the heart, it can conceal as much as it reveals. Madame, one final question. Did your husband speak of his work, of the treaty he championed? Did he fear enemies?" Clara lowered her hands, her expression hardening. "Victor never shared his work with me. He said it was too dangerous, that I wouldn't understand. But I knew he was worried. He'd been secretive lately, locking papers in his desk, meeting with people in private. I thought—" She hesitated, then continued, her voice barely audible. "I thought it was about another woman, but perhaps it was something else." Poirot leaned back, his fingers steepled. "Merci, madame. You have given me much to consider. Please, remain in the manor." Clara nodded, her shoulders sagging as she turned back to the window, her silhouette a portrait of grief against the darkened glass. Poirot rose, gesturing for Hastings to follow him into the corridor. "What do you make of her, mon ami?" he asked, his voice low. Hastings frowned, rubbing his chin. "She's devastated, Poirot. That jealousy, it's real, but murder. I don't know. That handkerchief is trouble, though." Poirot nodded, his eyes distant. "The handkerchief, it is a puzzle. If it is hers, why leave it so carelessly? If it is not, then someone wishes us to believe she is guilty. We must look deeper into her heart, and into the hearts of others." They moved toward the ballroom, where the guests had gathered in uneasy clusters, their masks now more a burden than a disguise. Poirot's thoughts turned to the crimson-cloaked Monsieur Leclerc, whose elusive presence continued to nag at his mind, the footman's account of the gold-stitched glove, the butler's confirmation of their proximity to the champagne tray. These were threads in a tapestry of deception, but the pattern remained unclear. "Hastings," Poirot said, pausing at the ballroom's entrance, "we must observe Madame Duval further, but discreetly. Her alibi is weak, her motive strong. Yet I sense she is not the whole story." As they stepped into the ballroom, Poirot's eyes scanned the crowd. Lady Eleanor stood near her husband, her face pale but composed. Sir Geoffrey Vance conversed with a group of diplomats, his gestures sharp and authoritative. And there, near a marble pillar, was the crimson cloak, its wearer's mask glinting in the chandelier light. Leclerc's posture was relaxed, but their eyes, visible through the mask's slits, were alert, watching the room with a predator's focus. Poirot's mustache twitched. "Mon ami," he said softly, "we must tread carefully. The jealous spouse is a potent force, but jealousy alone does not poison a glass. There is a deeper game here, and I, Hercule Poirot, will uncover its rules." He adjusted his cuffs, his resolve as unyielding as the manor's ancient stones, and stepped forward, ready to unravel the next thread in the Crimson Masquerade. Chapter 7. The political game. The study of Ashburn Manor was a fortress of solitude amidst the evening's chaos, its walls lined with dark mahogany shelves and maps of forgotten empires. A single lamp cast a pool of golden light over a desk, where papers lay in orderly stacks, their edges curling slightly in the damp night air. Hercule Poirot stood by the window, his silhouette sharp against the moonlit gardens beyond, his mind a whirl of calculated precision. The murder of Ambassador Victor Morel was no mere crime of passion. It was a move in a larger game, one with stakes that reached beyond the manor's gilded halls. Sir Geoffrey Vance, the stern British politician, sat across from him, his hawk-like mask discarded, revealing a face etched with resolve and a hint of defiance. Captain Arthur Hastings hovered near the door, his notebook open, his earnest gaze flicking between Poirot and Vance. "Monsieur Vance," Poirot began, his voice smooth but edged with authority, "you have made no secret of your opposition to Ambassador Morel's treaty. A document, I understand, that could shift the balance of power in Europe. Tell me, what was it about this treaty that stirred such passion in you?" Vance's jaw tightened, his fingers drumming a slow rhythm on the arm of his chair. "Morel's treaty was a betrayal," he said, his tone clipped. "It proposed concessions to France that would weaken Britain's standing trade routes, naval agreements, all dressed up as diplomacy. I warned him to abandon it. He laughed in my face, called me a relic." Poirot's eyes narrowed, catching the flicker of anger in Vance's expression. "A relic, monsieur. Strong words. And yet, you were in the card-room when Morel met his fate. Playing whist, you said." Vance nodded, his posture rigid. "With Lord Dunley, Colonel Hargreaves, and Lady Mortimer. We played two rubbers before the scream interrupted us. Ask them, they'll confirm it. Poirot's mustache twitched slightly. I shall, monsieur. But tell me, did you see Morel take his champagne? Or perhaps someone near the tray, a figure in a crimson cloak? Vance's brow furrowed, his eyes searching Poirot's face as if gauging his intent. I was in the card room, as I said. I didn't see the tray or any red cloaks. My focus was on the game, not Morel's antics. He leaned forward, his voice dropping. But I'll tell you this, Poirot Morel had enemies beyond me. His treaty wasn't just unpopular with Britain. There were whispers of foreign agents, people who'd do anything to stop it. You'd do well to look there. Poirot's fingers steepled, his gaze unwavering. Foreign agents, monsieur. A convenient suggestion. Yet you knew of the treaty's details, details not widely shared. How did you come by such knowledge? Vance hesitated, a shadow crossing his face. I have my sources, he said curtly. A man in my position hears things. Morel wasn't as discreet as he thought. He boasted about his negotiations, flaunted his influence. It made him a target. Poirot noted the deflection, the way Vance's hands clenched briefly before relaxing. A target, oui. And yet, it was poison that struck him, a weapon requiring intimacy, not distance. You are certain you saw nothing unusual? Vance shook his head, his expression resolute. Nothing. I'm no assassin, Poirot. If I wanted Morel gone, I'd have fought him in Parliament, not skulked about with poison. Poirot inclined his head, dismissing Vance with a polite nod. Merci, monsieur, you have been most forthcoming. Remain in the manor, if you please. Vance rose, his movements stiff, and exited the study, his footsteps heavy on the oak floor. Hastings closed his notebook, his brow creased with thought. He's a tough nut, Poirot. That alibi sounds solid, but his hatred for Morel palpable. Do you think he's hiding something? Mon ami Poirot replied, his voice low. Sir Geoffrey hides much, but whether it is murder, I am not yet certain. His knowledge of the treaty suggests connections perhaps to those foreign agents he mentions. We must verify his alibi and probe deeper. He moved to the desk, his eyes scanning the papers, a guest list, a seating chart, and a few innocuous letters. Nothing, at first glance, hinted at the treaty's specifics. But Poirot's instinct told him secrets were buried here. He turned to the window, his gaze drifting to the garden where Morel had died. The rose arbor now cordoned off by Japs. Men stood like a silent sentinel, its thorns glinting in the moonlight. Hastings, Poirot said, the treaty is the key. Morel's death was not merely personal, it was political. We must learn more of its contents and who stood to lose or gain from its failure. Hastings nodded, his enthusiasm tempered by the case's complexity. But how, Poirot? Those papers are locked away, and Ashburn's tight-lipped about the summit. Poirot's eyes gleamed. Tight-lipped, oui, but not impenetrable. We shall speak with Lord Ashburn again, and we shall search Morel's quarters. A man like Morel, he would not leave such a treaty unguarded. They left the study, navigating the manor's dimly lit corridors, where portraits of Ashburn ancestors seemed to watch their progress with solemn eyes. In the ballroom, the guests had settled into an uneasy truce with the night's tragedy, their conversations hushed, their masks now mostly discarded. Poirot spotted Madame Clara Duval near a velvet curtain, her face pale but composed, her hands no longer trembling. Lady Eleanor stood with her husband, her sapphire gown a stark contrast to her drawn expression, and there, by a marble pillar, was Monsieur Leclerc, their crimson cloak, a vivid splash against the muted crowd. Poirot's gaze lingered on them, noting the subtle tilt of their head, as if listening to a conversation across the room. Before approaching Ashburn, Poirot detoured to Inspector Japp, who was conferring with a constable near the French doors. Inspector, Poirot said, have you confirmed Sir Geoffrey's alibi? Japp nodded, flipping through his notebook. Poirot. Lord Dunley and the others say Vance was with them in the card-room from 11:30 until the scream. Seems watertight, unless they're all in on it. Poirot's lips curved slightly. Unlikely, but not impossible. And the champagne glasses say any results. Japp shook his head. The lab's still testing, but the residue on the broken glass is definitely cyanide. Only one glass was tampered with, which means the killer knew exactly which one Morel would take. Poirot's eyes narrowed. A targeted act, requiring knowledge of Morel's habits. We must find out who served him that glass and who was close enough to poison it. As Japp returned to his men, Poirot led Hastings toward Lord Ashburn, who stood near the orchestra. His emerald mask back in place, though it did little to hide his fatigue. "Monseigneur," Poirot said, his tone courteous but firm, "a word, if you please." The treaty Ambassador Morel championed. What was its purpose, and who opposed it? Ashburn's eyes flickered, and he glanced at his wife before answering. "It was a delicate matter, Poirot. A trade and defense pact with France, meant to stabilize relations. Morel was passionate about it, but it had critics, Vance, for one, and others abroad. I can't say more. It's confidential." Poirot's mustache twitched. "Confidential, oui, but a man is dead. I must know who had reason to stop this treaty." Ashburn sighed, his shoulders sagging. There were rumors of foreign interests, Eastern powers, perhaps, who saw it as a threat. "But I've no proof, only whispers." Poirot nodded, filing away the hint of foreign involvement. "And Morel's papers. Where did he keep them?" Ashburn hesitated. "In his room, I suppose. He was meticulous, always locking his desk." Poirot thanked him and turned to Hastings. "Mon ami, we shall visit Morel's quarters. The treaty, it holds the motive, I am certain." As they moved toward the staircase, Poirot's thoughts returned to Vance's words, "foreign agents, a treaty that threatened empires." The political game was a dangerous one, and Poirot was determined to uncover its players, one calculated step at a time. Chapter 8. The Crimson Enigma. The orangery of Ashburn Manor was a glass-walled sanctuary, its air thick with the scent of citrus blossoms and damp earth. Moonlight filtered through the panes, casting a lattice of shadows across the tiled floor, where potted orange trees stood like silent sentinels. Hercule Poirot had chosen this secluded space to confront the elusive Monsieur Leclerc, whose crimson cloak and guarded demeanor had woven themselves into the fabric of the night's mystery. The murder of Ambassador Victor Morel was a puzzle of precision, and Leclerc, with their calculated movements and cryptic presence, was a piece that refused to fit neatly. Captain Arthur Hastings stood by the door, his posture tense, his eyes fixed on the crimson figure who stood near a wrought iron bench, their black velvet mask glinting with gold filigree under the moon's pale glow. Poirot's small frame exuded authority as he approached, his cane tapping softly on the tiles. "Monsieur Leclerc," he said, his voice a blend of courtesy and steel, "you are a shadow in this affair, slipping through the cracks of truth. It is time to shed light. Who are you, and what brought you to this masquerade?" Leclerc's head turned slightly, their eyes dark and unreadable through the masks, slits meeting Poirot's with a flicker of amusement. "Monsieur Poirot," they replied, their voice low and tinged with an accent that now seemed distinctly Eastern European, perhaps Polish or Russian. "You are persistent. I am a guest, invited by Lord Ashburn to enjoy the evening's festivities." "Nothing more." Poirot's mustache twitched, a sign of his skepticism. "Nothing more, monsieur. Yet you were seen near the champagne tray, moments before Ambassador Morel took his fatal glass. The footman recalls your gold-stitched glove, your deliberate pause. Coincidence, perhaps." Leclerc's lips curved into a faint smile, their posture unchanged. "The ballroom was crowded, Monsieur Poirot. Many paused by that tray. I sought only to observe the splendor of the occasion. Their gloved hand gestured airily, but Poirot noted a subtle tension in their fingers, a barely perceptible tightening. He stepped closer, his eyes locked on Leclerc's observation. Monsieur, can be a dangerous pursuit. You are no ordinary guest. Your accent shifts, your manner conceals. In this Poirot's hand darted to a small table where Leclerc had rested their hand, retrieving a monogrammed cigarette case that had slipped from their cloak. Its silver surface bore the initial K, etched in an elegant script. This suggests a name, perhaps one you do not wish known. Leclerc's smile faltered for a fraction of a second, but they recovered swiftly, reaching for the case. Poirot held it just out of reach, his gaze unrelenting. A trinket. Nothing more, Leclerc said, their voice smooth but edged with caution. You read too much into trifles, Monsieur Poirot. Poirot's eyes gleamed. Trifles, monsieur, are the threads of truth. This K, it is yours, oui. And your hand, he gestured to Leclerc's right glove, where a faint scar was visible at the wrist, exposed by a slight shift of fabric. A mark of experience, perhaps. The hand of one who has known danger. Leclerc's eyes narrowed, but they did not deny it. Instead, they adjusted their cloak, the crimson fabric catching the moonlight like a spill of blood. You are perceptive, Leclerc said, their tone now colder. But perception is not proof. I had no quarrel with Morel. If you seek a killer, look to those with motives: jealous wives, rival politicians. Poirot tilted his head, his expression unreadable. Motives, oui, but the method poison so precise requires skill and opportunity. You were near the tray, monsieur, you cannot deny it. Leclerc's smile returned, sharp and enigmatic. I deny nothing, Monsieur Poirot, but I offer nothing, either. You must find your answers elsewhere. With a graceful turn, they moved toward the door, their cloaks swirling like a shadow. Hastings stepped forward, his voice urgent. Poirot, you can't let them walk away. They're hiding something, anyone can see it. Poirot raised a hand, silencing him. Patience, mon ami. To press too hard now is to lose the advantage. Monsieur Leclerc, whoever they may be, knows. We watch them, that is enough for now. He slipped the cigarette case into his pocket. Its weight a silent promise of secrets yet to be uncovered. As Leclerc vanished into the corridor, Poirot turned to Hastings, his mind racing. The scar, the initial K, the accent, they paint a picture, Hastings, of one who lives in shadows. A spy, perhaps, or an agent with a purpose beyond this ball. Hastings frowned, his brow creasing. A spy. Good Lord, Poirot, that's a bit dramatic, isn't it? But that cigarette case, it's a solid clue, and that scar, could it tie them to the poison? Poirot shook his head. The poison, it required no physical strength, only cunning. The scar suggests a past of risk, not necessarily this crime. But Leclerc's presence at the tray, their secrecy, it is no coincidence. They returned to the ballroom, where the guests' murmurs had grown sharper, their unease palpable. Inspector Japp approached, his face flushed from his efforts to manage the investigation. Poirot, we've got nothing new from the staff, he said, wiping his brow. The labs confirmed cyanide in the glass, but no fingerprints. Gloves, most likely. That red-cloaked chap, though two servants saw them near the tray. You think they're our man? Poirot's eyes twinkled. Man or woman, Inspector, we do not yet know. But Leclerc is a thread we must follow. Have your men watch them discreetly. Japp nodded, jotting a note. Right, I'll set a constable on it. But what's your next move, Poirot? This lot's closing ranks. Nobody's talking straight. Poirot adjusted his cuffs, his resolve unshaken. My next move, Inspector, is to search Morel's quarters. If Leclerc is an agent, as I suspect, then Morel's papers may hold the key to their motive. The treaty, it is the heart of this crime. I am certain. As they moved toward the staircase, Poirot's thoughts churned. The cigarette case, the scar, the gold-stitched glove, these were fragments of a larger truth. Leclerc's cryptic warning echoed in his mind. Some truths are better left buried. But for Hercule Poirot, no truth was too deep to unearth. The crimson enigma stood at the center of the masquerade, and he would unmask them, one delicate clue at a time. Chapter 9. The treaties shadow. The upper corridors of Ashburn Manor were cloaked in silence. Their shadowed walls adorned with portraits whose eyes seemed to follow Hercule Poirot and Captain Arthur Hastings as they ascended the grand staircase. The air was heavy with the scent of beeswax and old wood, a reminder of the manor's ancient dignity, now tainted by the stain of murder. Poirot's patent leather shoes clicked softly on the polished floor, his cane a steady counterpoint to Hastings' heavier tread. The investigation into Ambassador Victor Morel's death had reached a critical juncture, and Poirot's little gray cells were alight with the certainty that the motive lay hidden in the diplomat's private papers. The treaty, whispered about in hushed tones, was the pivot around which this deadly dance revolved, and Poirot was determined to uncover its secrets. They reached the guest wing, where Morel's quarters were located, a suite of rooms overlooking the manor's formal gardens. Inspector Japp had secured the area, and a young constable stood guard at the door, his face pale under the weight of his duty. "Monsieur Poirot," he said, saluting awkwardly. Inspector Japp said, "You're to have full access. No one's been in since the incident." Poirot nodded, his expression grave. "Merci, monsieur. Ensure we are not disturbed." The constable stepped aside, and Poirot turned the brass handle, ushering Hastings into the room. The suite was elegantly appointed, with a four-poster bed draped in green velvet, a marble writing desk, and a window framing the moonlit rose arbor where Morel had met his end. The air held a faint trace of the ambassador's cologne, sharp and citrusy, mingling with the musty scent of paper. Poirot's eyes swept the room, noting the meticulous order, a testament to Morel's disciplined nature. "Hastings," he said, his voice low, "we seek papers, letters, anything that speaks of the treaty. A man like Morel would guard such documents with care." Hastings nodded, his enthusiasm tempered by the room's somber atmosphere. "Right, Poirot. A locked desk, perhaps, or a hidden compartment." He moved to the desk, where a leather blotter held a neat stack of envelopes and a silver inkstand. Poirot, meanwhile, examined a small traveling case near the bed, its lock gleaming under the lamplight. With a deft movement, he produced a slender tool from his Pokita lockpick, acquired through years of necessity, and set to work. The lock yielded with a soft click, revealing a bundle of papers tied with a ribbon. "Regardes, mon ami," Poirot said, his eyes gleaming as he untied the ribbon. The papers were a mix of correspondence and diplomatic drafts written in Morel's precise hand. Among them was a document headed Provisional Treaty of Alliance, its pages dense with clauses on trade routes, naval cooperation, and mutual defense between France and Britain. Poirot's fingers traced the text, pausing at a marginal note. In a different hand, a scrawled code, a series of numbers and letters. "This," he murmured, "is not Morel's writing. It suggests a collaborator, or an observer." Hastings peered over his shoulder, his brow creasing. "A code, Poirot. Could it point to that Leclerc fellow? You said they might be a spy." Poirot's mustache twitched. "Perhaps, Hastings, but we must not leap to conclusions. This coded hints at surveillance, perhaps by a foreign power. The treaty, it seems, was a threat to someone beyond these walls." He slipped the coded note into his pocket, his mind racing to connect it to the crimson-cloaked enigma. A soft creak from the corridor startled Hastings, who spun toward the door. "What was that?" he whispered. Poirot raised a hand, his senses alert. "Calm, mon ami. It may be the constable or someone less welcome." He moved silently to the door, opening it to find the corridor empty, save for the constable, who stood rigid at his post. "Did you hear a sound, monsieur?" Poirot asked. The constable shook his head. "Nothing, sir. Just the house settling. Maybe." Poirot's eyes narrowed, but he returned to the room, his suspicion undiminished. At the desk, Hastings had found a locked drawer, its key missing. "Poirot, this might hold something," he said, tugging at the handle. Poirot applied his lockpick once more, and the drawer slid open to reveal a single sheet of paper, a letter, unsigned, but written in a hurried slanting script. It read, "The treaty must not proceed. K has orders. Midnight, the garden." Poirot's breath caught, his fingers tightening on the paper. "K," he said softly. "The initial from the cigarette case. This is no coincidence, Hastings." Hastings' eyes widened. "K, for Leclerc, or someone else. And this meeting in the garden, could it be where Morel was poisoned?" Poirot nodded, his mind piecing together the fragments. Possible mon ami. Morel was lured to the garden, perhaps expecting a rendezvous, only to meet his death. The treaty's enemies were watching, and they struck with precision. He folded the letter carefully, adding it to his growing collection of clues. They continued their search, but the room yielded no further secrets. As they prepared to leave, Poirot paused by the window, his gaze fixed on the rose arbor below. "The treaty's shadow is long," he said, his voice low. "It reaches beyond Morel, beyond this manor. Sir Geoffrey spoke of foreign agents. And now we have this K. A name, a code, a threat." Hastings rubbed his chin, his expression troubled. "But Poirot, if Leclerc is this K, why stay after the murder? Why not flee?" Poirot's eyes twinkled. "Because, mon ami, they are confidenteurs. They have more to accomplish. A spy does not act alone. They are part of a web. We must find the threads that connect Leclerc to this treaty, on to Morel's death." He adjusted his tie, his resolve as firm as the manor's stone walls. "Come, Hastings, we return to Lord Ashburn. He knows more of this treaty than he admits, and I shall have the truth." They descended to the ballroom, where the guests had grown restless, their whispers sharp with speculation. Lord Ashburn stood near a marble fireplace, his emerald mask dangling from his hand, his face etched with worry. "Monseigneur," Poirot said, approaching, "the treaty Morel championed it was opposed by foreign powers. You spoke of whispers. I must know more." Ashburn's eyes darted to his wife, who stood nearby, her expression unreadable. "Monsieur Poirot," he said, his voice strained. "There were rumors of Eastern interests, perhaps Russia or its allies, who saw the treaty as a barrier to their ambitions. Morel was warned, but he was stubborn. He believed he could outmaneuver them." Poirot's gaze sharpened. "And these warnings, did they name anyone, AK? Perhaps." Ashburn's face paled, and he shook his head. "No names, only vague threats. Morel kept his own counsel." Poirot noted the hesitation, the glance toward Lady Eleanor. The treaty's shadow stretched over them all, and Poirot sensed that Ashburn's fear was not merely for his guests, but for secrets closer to home. As they stepped away, Hastings whispered, "Poirot, that letter, it's damning. Is K there our killer, surely?" Poirot's lips curved slightly. "Not surely, Hastings. The letter is a clue, but not a confession. We must watch Leclerc, and we must uncover the treaty's full scope. The truth lies in its pages, and I, Hercule Poirot, will find it." His eyes scanned the ballroom, where the crimson cloak of Monsieur Leclerc stood out like a warning. And he knew the next move in this deadly game was near. Chapter 10. The Masquerade unravels the ballroom of Ashburn Manor. Once a stage for elegance and revelry, now simmered with unease, its chandeliers casting a fractured light over the assembled guests. The masks that had lent an air of mystery to the evening were mostly discarded, revealing faces etched with suspicion and fatigue. Hercule Poirot stood at the center of the room, his small frame radiating an authority that silenced the murmurs of the crowd. His silver mask rested in his hand, its filigree glinting like a challenge, while his sharp eyes scanned the faces before him. Lord and Lady Ashburn, Madame Clara Duval, Sir Geoffrey Vance, and the enigmatic Monsieur Leclerc, whose crimson cloak stood out like a wound against the muted tones of the gathering. Captain Arthur Hastings stood at his side, his notebook clutched tightly, his expression a blend of awe and anticipation. Inspector Japp lingered near the French doors, his constables stationed discreetly around the room, ready to act. Mesdames, et messieurs, Poirot began, his voice clear and resonant, cutting through the tension like a blade. A crime has been committed, a life extinguished in the heart of this masquerade. Ambassador Victor Morel was poisoned, his death no accident but a calculated act. The truth, it hides behind masks, but I, Hercule Poirot, have seen through the deception. Tonight, the masquerade unravels. The guests shifted uneasily, their eyes darting to one another. Lady Eleanor clutched her husband's arm, her sapphire gown a stark contrast to her pale face. Madame Duval's hands trembled, her grief now tempered by fear. Sir Geoffrey Vance stood rigid, his stern features betraying nothing, while the black velvet mask remained in place, their dark eyes unreadable. Poirot's gaze lingered on each, his little gray cells weaving together the threads of evidence: the shattered champagne glass, the cyanide residue, the handkerchief with the C, the monogrammed cigarette case, the coded note, and the letter referencing K. The pieces were falling into place, and Poirot was ready to reveal the pattern. "Let us begin with the method," he said, pacing slowly, his cane tapping the parquet floor. The poison cyanide was administered through a single champagne glass, tampered with moments before Morel took it. The footman, Thomas, and the butler, Grayson, both saw a figure in a crimson cloak near the tray. This was no random act. The murderer knew Morel would take that glass. But why? Why this man, at this moment? He paused, turning to Madame Duval, whose eyes widened under his scrutiny. "Madame, your jealousy was evident. You saw your husband with Lady Eleanor, and your heart burned with betrayal. The handkerchief with the initial C, found near the body, points to you. Yet it is too convenient, Nan. A true murderer would not leave such a clue unless it was meant to mislead." Clara's lips parted, but no words came. She shook her head, tears brimming. Poirot's gaze softened, but he pressed on. "Your alibi is weak, madame, but your grief it is genuine. I do not believe you poisoned your husband." A murmur rippled through the crowd, and Poirot turned to Lady Eleanor. "Madame Ashburn, your own distress was clear. You argued with Morel, rebuffed his advances. Your husband feared scandal, perhaps, but murder. It is not your way." Lord Ashburn's face flushed, and he opened his mouth to protest, but Poirot raised a hand. "Patience, monseigneur. Your role is not yet clear, but I sense you know more than you say." He pivoted to Sir Geoffrey Vance, whose stern expression hardened. "Monsieur Vance, your opposition to Morel's treaty was fierce. You called it a betrayal, and your alibi list in the cardroom is confirmed by 3 witnesses. Yet your knowledge of the treaty's details suggests deeper involvement. You spoke of foreign agents, a convenient distraction. But poison, as you said, is not your weapon." Vance's jaw clenched, but he remained silent, his eyes cold. Poirot's gaze settled on Leclerc, standing apart, their crimson cloak, a vivid accusation. "And you, Monsieur Leclerc, should I say, Mademoiselle Katrina Volkov?" A gasp swept the room, and Leclerc's posture stiffened, their hand twitching toward their cloak. Poirot stepped forward, his voice rising. "The cigarette case with the initial K, the scar on your wrist, the letter in Morel's desk mentioning K, and a midnight meeting, these are not coincidences. You are no guest, but a spy, sent to stop the treaty that threatened your country's ambitions. The ballroom erupted in whispers, and Leclerc's hand moved to their mask, hesitating before pulling it away. The face revealed was that of a woman, her features sharp and striking, her dark eyes blazing with defiance. "You are clever, Monsieur Poirot," she said, her accent now unmistakably Russian, "but you have no proof." Poirot's smile was thin. "Proof, mademoiselle. The footman saw your gold-stitched glove near the tray. The butler confirmed your presence. The letter in Morel's desk named K as the one with orders to stop the treaty. You laced the champagne glass with cyanide, knowing Morel would take it, and you lured him to the garden under the pretense of a meeting." Katrina Volkov's lips curved into a cold smile. "A fine story, but where is the evidence? A glove, a letter, these are nothing." Poirot's eyes gleamed. "The scar on your wrist, mademoiselle, it matches the mark of an agent trained in covert operations. The cigarette case, left carelessly, bears your initial and the code in Morel's papers. It matches the cipher used by your government's operatives. You acted to prevent the treaty's signing, a treaty that would have aligned France and Britain against your nation's interests." Volkov's smile faded, her eyes narrowing. "You cannot prove I touched the glass." Poirot nodded, as if conceding the point. "True, mademoiselle. But the truth, it reveals itself in patterns. You were seen, you were named, and your motive is clear. The masquerade, it was your shield, but it has unraveled." He turned to Jap, who stepped forward, his face grim. "Inspector, I believe you have cause to detain Mademoiselle Volkov." Jap nodded, signaling to his constables. "Right, miss, you're coming with us." Volkov's eyes flashed, but she did not resist as the constables approached. The crowd parted, their whispers rising to a crescendo. Lady Eleanor clung to her husband, her relief palpable, while Madame Duval's tears flowed freely. Vance's expression remained unreadable, his silence a fortress of its own. Hastings leaned close to Poirot, his voice a whisper. "Good Lord, Poirot, you've done it. But how did you know it was her?" Poirot's mustache twitched. "Mon ami, the clues they spoke. The initial, the scar, the letter, they formed a portrait, and Volkov could not escape it." As the constables led Volkov away, Poirot's gaze lingered on the crimson cloak, now a symbol of a truth laid bare. The masquerade was over, but the echoes of its deception would linger in the manor's halls. Chapter 11. The Confession, the grand ballroom of Ashburn Manor. Its opulence now dimmed by the weight of revelation, stood hushed as Katrina Volkov was led away by Inspector Jap's constables. The crimson cloak that had marked her as an enigma trailed behind her like a fading ember, her unmasked face a study in steely resolve. The guests, their faces bare of masks, watched in stunned silence, their earlier whispers replaced by a collective breath, held in anticipation of finality. Poirot remained at the center of the room, his small frame a beacon of certainty amidst the turmoil. His silver mask lay forgotten on a nearby table, his sharp eyes reflecting the chandelier's fractured light. As he prepared to seal the case with the clarity only he could provide, Captain Arthur Hastings stood close, his notebook tucked under his arm, his expression a mixture of triumph and disbelief. "Poirot," he whispered, "you've done it again. But how did you piece it all together so quickly? That Volkov woman, she's a cold one, isn't she?" Poirot's mustache twitched, a faint smile playing at his lips. "Mon ami, the truth, it is like a mosaic, each piece, small, but together, a masterpiece. Mademoiselle Volkov's confession will confirm what the clues have already told us." Inspector Jap, his face flushed with the exertion of the night, approached Poirot, his notebook open. "Well, Poirot, you've got her dead to rights, but we'll need a statement. She's not talking much yet." He gestured toward a small antechamber off the ballroom, where Volkov had been taken for Questioning. Poirot nodded, his resolve unshaken. Lead the way, Inspector. The confession, it will be the final thread in this tapestry of deceit. The antechamber was a stark contrast to the ballroom's grandeur, its walls plain and its furniture fine. Single oak table and a few chairs under a flickering gas lamp. Katrina Volkov sat composed, her wrists bound by the constable's cuffs, her dark eyes fixed on Poirot as he entered with Japp and Hastings. Her crimson cloak was draped over a chair, revealing a sleek black gown that spoke of elegance and purpose. "Monsieur Poirot," she said, her voice low and steady, with a distinct Russian accent now fully revealed, "you are as formidable as they say. But you waste your time. I have nothing to confess." Poirot took a seat across from her, his posture impeccable, his gaze piercing. "Mademoiselle Volkov," he said, his tone calm but unrelenting, "you are mistaken. The evidence, it speaks louder than your silence. The cigarette case with the initial K, the scar on your wrist, the letter in Morel's desk naming K as the one with orders to stop the treaty, these are not trifles, they are your signature." He leaned forward, his eyes locking with hers. "You poisoned Ambassador Morel to prevent the treaty signing. Deny it, and you deny the truth itself." Volkov's lips curved into a faint, defiant smile. "You weave a fine story, Monsieur Poirot. But evidence is not proof. A cigarette case, a letter circumstantial, at best." Poirot's expression remained unchanged, his voice taking on a steely edge. "Circumstantial, oui, but the pattern is clear. The footman saw your gold-stitched glove near the champagne tray. The butler confirmed your presence. The cyanide was applied to one glass Morel's glass moments before he took it. You knew his habits, his movements. You lured him to the garden with the promise of a meeting, and there he drank his death." Volkov's smile faltered, her eyes flickering with a hint of unease. She leaned back, her bound hands resting on the table. "You are clever," she said softly, "but you cannot know my mind. Why would I risk such a public act?" Poirot's gaze sharpened. "Because, mademoiselle, the treaty threatened your country's ambitions. A pact between France and Britain would have shifted power, weakened your nation's influence in the East. You were sent to stop it. And you chose poison quick, silent, and masked by the chaos of the ball." A tense silence followed, broken only by the faint ticking of a clock on the wall. Hastings shifted, his breath held, while Japp's pencil hovered over his notebook. Volkov's eyes met Poirot's, and for a moment the room seemed to hold only the two of them, a duel of intellect and will. Then, slowly, she exhaled, her shoulders relaxing, as if a weight had lifted. "Very well, Monsieur Poirot," she said, her voice cold, but clear. "You have earned your truth. I poisoned Victor Morel. The treaty would have ruined my country's plans, a delicate balance we could not allow. I laced his champagne glass with cyanide, a simple powder slipped from my glove as I passed the tray. I signaled him to meet me in the garden, knowing he would drink first. It was efficient." Hastings gasped, his notebook slipping slightly in his grip. "Good Lord, she admits it." Japp's pencil scratched furiously, his eyes wide. "That's it then. You're under arrest, miss, for murder." Volkov's gaze remained on Poirot, a flicker of respect in her eyes. "You are right about one thing, Monsieur Poirot. The scarlet is a mark of my training. But the cigarette case, a careless mistake. I underestimated you." Poirot inclined his head, his expression unreadable. "Carelessness, mademoiselle, is the downfall of even the most cunning. The letter in Morel's desk, the code, your presence at the treaties were not mistakes, but inevitabilities. The truth, it always reveals itself to Hercule Poirot." He rose, his movements precise, and turned to Japp. "Inspector, you have your confession. Ensure Mademoiselle Volkov is held securely." As the constables escorted Volkov from the room, her crimson cloak trailing behind her, Poirot returned to the ballroom, where the guests awaited news. Lady Eleanor stood with her husband, her face a mixture of relief and exhaustion. Madame Clara Duval, her tears now dry, clutched a new handkerchief, her grief tempered by the resolution of her husband's murder. Sir Geoffrey Vance stood apart. His stern features softened slightly, though his eyes betrayed a lingering unease. Hastings followed Poirot, his voice low. "That was extraordinary, Poirot. But what about Vance? He knew too much about the treaty. And the Ashburns, they seemed nervous." Poirot nodded, his eyes scanning the crowd. "Vance's knowledge is troubling, mon ami, but his alibi holds. As for the Ashburns, their fear was of scandal, not guilt. The treaty's shadow touched them all, but Volkov acted alone. Her confession confirms it." Lord Ashburn approached, his face drawn. "Monsieur Poirot, is it over? The murderer is caught." Poirot's gaze softened. "Oui, monseigneur, the killer is in custody, and your summit may proceed, though its heart is lost." Ashburn sighed, his relief palpable. "Thank you, Poirot. This night, it will haunt us." As the guests began to disperse, their whispers fading into the night, Poirot stood by the French doors, his thoughts lingering on the crimson cloak and the woman who had worn it. The confession had closed the case, but its echoes would resonate, a reminder of the delicate balance between diplomacy and deceit. Chapter 12. The final waltz. As dawn broke over Ashburn Manor, its first pale rays pierced the mist that clung to the Sussex hills, casting a soft glow on the estate's weathered stone. The ballroom, once alive with the swirl of masks and music, now stood empty, its chandeliers dimmed, their light no longer needed to conceal the secrets of the night. The guests had begun to depart, their carriages crunching on the gravel drive, their faces weary from the ordeal of Ambassador Victor Morel's murder and the unmasking of Katrina Volkov. Hercule Poirot stood on the terrace, his tailored coat buttoned against the morning chill, his keen eyes tracing the path to the rose arbor where the tragedy had unfolded. Captain Arthur Hastings joined him, his usual vigor subdued, his hands tucked into his pockets as he gazed at the fading stars. "Poirot," Hastings said, his voice tinged with awe, "you've done it again. That Volkov woman cooled as ice, confessing like that. But I can't help feeling there's more to this, don't you? All those whispers about the treaty, the Ashburns' nerves, Vance's secrets." He trailed off, shaking his head. Poirot's mustache twitched, a faint smile softening his features. "Mon ami, you see shadows where the light now shines. The case is solved, the murderer caught. Yet you are right, the human heart, it always holds more than one truth." Poirot turned, his gaze sweeping the manor's facade, its windows reflecting the dawn-like watchful eyes. Katrina Volkov acted to protect her nation's interests, her poison as precise as her training. But the others, Lady Eleanor, Madame Duval, Sir Geoffrey, even Lord Ashburn, they each carried their own burdens. Jealousy, ambition, fear of scandal. These were the undercurrents of the masquerade, but they did not wield the cyanide. He adjusted his hat, its brim casting a shadow over his sharp features. The treaty, it was the spark, and Volkov the flame that extinguished Morel's life. Hastings nodded, though his brow remained creased. "And that treaty, what happens now? Without Morel, will it fall apart?" Poirot's eyes gleamed with a quiet certainty. "That, mon ami, is for diplomats to decide. Our task was to unmask a killer, and that we have done. The balance of power, it shifts, but the truth, it remains." He paused, his gaze lingering on the garden, where the rose arbor stood silent, its thorns no longer a threat. Inspector Japp emerged from the manor, his coat rumpled from a night of tireless work. "Poirot," he said, tipping his hat, "Volkov's on her way to the station, under guard. We've got her confession, the glass, the letter enough to make it stick. You've outdone yourself this time." Poirot inclined his head, his expression modest but pleased. "Mercy, Inspector. But it is the clues. They do the work. I merely arrange them in their proper order." Japp chuckled, a rare sound in the morning's stillness. "Proper order, my foot. You've got a knack, Poirot, and I'm glad you were here. Now I've got paperwork to slog through. Care to join me for a pint later?" Poirot's smile widened. "A pint, Inspector. Nan, I prefer my tisane, but I shall see you soon, I have no doubt." Japp waved a hand and trudged toward his waiting car, leaving Poirot and Hastings alone on the terrace. The manor's doors opened once more, and Lord Ashburn appeared, his face haggard but relieved. "Monsieur Poirot," he said, extending a hand, "I cannot thank you enough. This night could have ruined us, but you've brought clarity. The summit will continue, though it will be different without Morel." Poirot clasped his hand briefly, his grip firm. "Monseigneur, the truth is my reward. Guard your guests well in the future, for masks conceal more than faces." As Ashburn retreated, Poirot turned to Hastings, his voice low. "The human heart, mon ami, it wears many masks: jealousy, ambition, loyalty. But the truth, it always reveals itself to Hercule Poirot." He gestured toward the horizon, where the sun was rising, bathing the manor in gold. "Come, Hastings. The final waltz is over, and London awaits. We have unraveled the Crimson Masquerade, but there will always be another puzzle." They descended the terrace steps, their shadows stretching across the gravel as the manor faded into the morning light. The echoes of the night's deception lingered, a reminder of the delicate dance between truth and lies, and Poirot's unyielding quest to master it.